It all started over a year ago, living in my current small neighborhood. It was unusually hot in our house for October, and my sister figured it would be a good idea to keep our window open for a bit of air. She was doing her homework and I was getting ready for bed when suddenly she burst into my room. She frantically says that she heard some noises outside, sounds of leaves crunching over a person's steps. I believed it to be an animal, so I walked into her room and stayed there for not more than 5 minutes until I hear leaves crunching. We quickly glanced out the window only to hear the sound of something running away in the woods. But that wouldn't be the end of the story. During the winter, I enjoyed exploring the woods towards the back of my house, climbing trees, and traveling further back into the fields. I remembered the events very clearly. It had just snowed that night, first snowfall of winter, and I was more excited to head out there, so I did so and climbed my usual tree to look out. I gave a cursory glance around me and at the ground when I noticed something strange, footsteps leading away from my house. This would not be as weird as long as front of the footsteps didn't end pointing straight at my house and the origin of them came from a seemingly long-off start. I tracked them down to a point. There was a rusty wire fence covered in snow where they disappeared. October 2017, it started up again. I was laying in bed, pitch dark, not a light shining through my room when I heard it, my doorknob turning and my door creaking open. My heart stopped. Every single possibility of what it was rushing through my mind. Since I was covered by my blanket, I quickly shot my sister a text. "Did you just come in my room?" She replied with a sharp no. I did not. My heart began pumping fast. I slowly snuck my hand under my pillow and grabbed my baton, sent a text to my dad and waited. My dad came in mere minutes later with a knife, shot on the lights and jumped out of bed. Searched the house with nothing. Alarm set and all doors locked. Impossible. There's no way that happened otherwise. My dad and my mom were asleep, and a cat would have opened it much faster if it had jumped at the doorknob. You best believe I didn't sleep a second that night. Fast forward to December, my relatives in town, staying for a week in the basement. We turn on the alarm and all head to sleep. I stayed up gaming in the morning, 2:30 to 3 o'clock. My uncle slowly opened his eyes with a feeling of being watched. His eyes adjusted a bit to the dark before he saw it. A guy, average height, scrawny, hair flowing in the wind, and shivering, looking inside their room through the window. My uncle screamed, and they grabbed the baby before taking off upstairs. That morning I was informed what happened. I looked for footprints and saw only the smallest sign of footprints, a foot-toe print, made by which I could only assume was a sneaker. My uncle gave me more details without me telling him. I looked for footprints and he said the guy was leaning to the left looking in. The footprint matched his story. The left had a thin line of dirt anyone could have shimmied across. That leads to the night I could swear he or whatever it was had been in our house. I could not sleep. Life has been very stressful lately, and I was up pretty much all night until I tried getting rest. Every night I've had string Christmas lights dimly lit the room until tonight. I figured the lights must have been interfering with my sleep, so I unplugged them and headed off to sleep. Pillow over my head, I started to drift off until it happened. A quick strum of my guitar and the sound of something falling, with a desperate attempt to stop it from hitting the ground, filled the room. This sound ignited my heart rate. Saliva developing at an extreme speed made it hard to not swallow. I could feel the presence of someone in my room. Realizing I left my baton on my desk, I did the next logical thing, pretend I was asleep. I tried and laid there for what seemed like hours, when in reality it was only a few minutes, until I heard a whimper come from my sister's room. Imagining this may be the day everyone in my family was silently murdered, but I gathered all of the courage I had. I grabbed my phone, turned on my flashlight, and grabbed my baton. I busted into my sister's room and screamed, "Hey!" only to see they were unharmed. My sister asked what the hell I was doing, and I just stood there, looked into the pitch black of my room, and cried. I have never felt the overwhelming emotion of believing my family was going to be taken from me until today. I sit here in my chair writing this in hopes to document my experiences and to try to come to some logical conclusion. All I can come up with is that there is some guy stalking my family and perhaps sneaking into our rooms at night. I'm a woman 5'6" and 120 pounds, if that matters. A few years back when I was 19 or 20, I had just gotten my first apartment in the basement of an apartment complex. That probably sounds somewhat odd, but a friend's mother talked to the apartment's landlord to find me a cheap place to live. This was in Denver, so it wasn't cheap for a one-bedroom apartment in most places. The basement apartment was a studio located at the base of a flight of stairs. The first few months living alone were fine. There was a smoking area up the flight of stairs that led to my apartment. One day I was up there having a cigarette when a Native American man sat next to me and also started smoking. He was a resident in the apartment complex. His name was John. John seemed mostly normal, maybe a little bit lonely, but nothing unnerving. He said he lived alone and he was an artist. We chatted until my cigarette was through. I said goodbye to John and went back downstairs. I would see John occasionally smoking as I was going to or coming from work. He always just said hi and never gave off any red flags, which makes this all the more creepy. One night when I was asleep, I woke up to the sound of the doorknob to my apartment jiggling. It was like someone was frantically trying to break the lock. I got out of bed and immediately grabbed a knife from the kitchenette. If this had been a normal room in the apartment, someone would have heard. But my apartment was secluded on the subterranean level. I stood right next to the jiggling doorknob and said, "Hello, who's there?" No one answered. I looked through the peephole, but it was just too dark to see. I said in a loud, confident voice, "If you come in here, I will fucking kill you." And I was serious about it too. The jiggling immediately stopped. Whoever it was booked it back up the stairs. I don't know if they thought I was asleep until then or what, but they were obviously scared. I could see their shadow go up the stairs through the peephole, but could not make out the person's features. I made a mistake that night when I decided not to call the cops. I felt like it would have been a hassle, and that was probably some drunk person causing mischief. My heart was pounding from the adrenaline, but I felt confident I could take care of myself and quickly forgot about the incident. About a week later, during the nighttime, I woke up and realized the door to my apartment was wide open. I examined the door and the doorknob had been completely removed from its socket. I don't know how he broke the doorknob out of there without waking me up. There was a clean hole where the doorknob was mounted to the door and the doorknob was gone. The kitchen knife I had threatened the intruder with the week before was lying on the ground next to my bed. This person had been in my room watching me sleep, and they had left without doing anything. I'm lucky, I guess. I bought a deadbolt for the door and had the doorknob replaced. I was a little on edge for the next few weeks, but nothing happened until a few weeks later, when the guy tried to break in broad daylight. He was doing this doorknob jiggling routine, and I saw this time that it was John, completely drunk. I know because I yelled at him, and he scurried drunkenly back up the stairs like the first time. He apparently was known for having a drinking problem. After that time, the entire complex knew what he had done. Still, John, let's not meet again. This happened 7, maybe 8 years ago. Back when I was 22, I was working the third shift at a hotel as the night manager and had been for a few years by then. I hadn't gotten used to the creepers and the drunk by then, and the eerie feeling of being the only employee on staff had all but vanished. It was just a job and I loved it. I could play video games on my laptop behind the desk all night and was rarely bothered other than an occasional rowdy drunk group or those late night gross calls. The front of my hotel had 2 outside glass doors, an entryway, and another set of glass doors to enter the hotel. My desk was about 10 steps forward and 10 steps to the left once inside. So around 2 a.m. one night, this guy came in under 6 foot, wearing a baseball cap, jeans, and tan jacket. He did not come in all the way, though. He was in the entryway, opened one door about halfway, looked at me, up at the cameras, and backed his head out a little bit. But I did not shut the door. Immediate red flags. I asked if I could help him, and he told me that there was a broken sprinkler on our property that was flooding the street. I informed him we didn't use in-ground sprinklers. He insisted it was ours, and it was flooding the street. I again informed him that we do not use in-ground sprinklers and that it most likely belonged to one of the surrounding businesses, and that I would call around in the morning when they all opened and let them know. He was really anxious. I wasn't sure if it was because he wanted to rob me or if it was because he was weirdly concerned about a broken sprinkler. Now he wanted me to come inside with him to see. I told him I wasn't allowed to leave the desk. He lingered, then thinking, and just said, "What about the sprinkler then?" "It's wasting water." I told him that there was nothing that I could do right now. I offered to call non-emergency and have a police officer come by if that would ease him. He said no, they can't do anything about it, and left after slightly lingering again. After he left, my adrenaline kicked in. I hadn't realized how scared I was until he was gone. I was shaking. I decided to call my boyfriend. I thought about calling the owner at home, but I didn't feel it was necessary to wake him up. I do, however, call around to the other hotels nearby and told them what had happened. Night shifts were pretty close, and anytime something weird happened, we'd call around to warn the others. Fast forward about 10 minutes, I'm talking to my boyfriend and repeating the events, and my curiosity really piqued. I had to know if there was in fact a broken sprinkler. Maybe I was blowing this out of proportion. I needed to smoke bad too, so I kept my boyfriend on the line and went outside. No broken sprinkler in sight. I was through the parking lot towards a restaurant about 300 or 400 feet away when I see the broken sprinkler. It had been obvious to anyone that the sprinkler belonged to the restaurant. It was gushing water, bent sideways like it had been run over or kicked. I then noticed the pickup truck on the other side in the restaurant's parking lot. It was parked sideways, passenger door facing me, and it was open. I started to hustle it back to the hotel when I heard the truck start up. I looked behind me and saw the same man looking at me through the open passenger door. I couldn't see his face, but I saw that baseball cap and that tan jacket. He drove very quickly, not even shutting the passenger door. I called the cops immediately and filed a report. The police made our hotel part of their nightly patrol for a few days after that, but I never saw him again. This happened when I was 19 or 20. I was an attractive and very polite female. I was at a beach near my house in New Jersey in the middle of the day, but it was early May and about 60 degrees outside, so not too many people were there, maybe 2 or 3 at the beach. I was by myself in a bathing suit, sitting on my towel reading a book when this man came up to me. Man was probably in his late 30s, early 40s. Fit in what most people would consider attractive. He sat down on my towel and asked me what I was reading. I was already freaked out that a stranger would come up and sit on my towel with me, but I answered. Kept asking questions like my name, my age, where I went to school, and I made up all these answers. Then he moved over and sat right next to me and started putting his hand on my crotch. I screamed and ran, and luckily there was someone else on the beach at this time who looked over at us, so he didn't chase me. I ran back to my car that was in a parking lot about a half a mile away. There were no other cars there, and I looked around and didn't see the man anywhere. I assumed my scream and the other person on the beach scared him off. Fast forward 2 or 3 days later, and I get a letter in the mail without a return address. It was stamped from a post office as a town where I remember the man saying he was from. Keep in mind, I was still living with my parents at the time. I opened the envelope and it's 2 pages, handwritten from the man. I know I did not tell him any real information about myself, so I have no idea how he found my address or any of the info he wrote about. He knew my full name, the school I went to, my parents' name, and my cell phone numbers. He also wrote about seeing me at a place where I was a few days prior. I was freaking out at this point and shaking. He signed his name and left a phone number, but again, no address. I immediately went to the police with the letter in a plastic bag in case they would look at fingerprints. I told the detective about him touching me on the beach as well. The detective said he couldn't do anything because there was no evidence of a crime, but offered a call and to scare him. He kept the letter, and I'm assuming he called the man that day and told him to leave me alone. I have never heard from him again, but I was sure I saw him following me in a car shortly after I ran away on the beach. He must have followed me back to my house or gotten my license plate number to get all of the information that he wrote about. But I looked everywhere and there were no cars behind me when I left, or really anywhere in the parking lot. I was paying extremely close attention. I also didn't go straight back to my house. I drove about an hour away to my friend's because I was so freaked out and didn't go until late that night. So he either followed me all throughout that time, got my information from my license plate, or he had been following me previously. So creepy man on the beach. Let's not meet again.
Alright, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead, like, share, subscribe. Thank you for watching.